Judge Harlan's words sliced through the packed courtroom like a knife. "Sit down, little ghetto girl. Adults are talking." Jada Thompson stood frozen while every eye bored into her. Her father, Darius, sat in handcuffs with his head bowed. "Your Honor, my father is innocent," she said. The judge slammed his gavel. "Security, remove this child." He pointed at Jada as if she were garbage. The gallery stared, some shaking their heads, others smirking. The bailiff stepped forward. Darius reached toward his daughter with shackled hands, tears streaming down his face. The prosecutor shuffled papers, barely hiding his amusement, but Jada did not move. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, her eyes narrowed with laser focus. In that moment, surrounded by contempt, something awakened inside her, something dangerous. Jada Thompson sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, surrounded by towers of yellowed law books. The cramped apartment on the east side of Detroit felt smaller with every passing year, yet those books made her world infinite. "Dad, why do you keep all these old law books if you're just a construction worker?" Jada called out, holding up a battered copy of constitutional law. Darius Thompson appeared in her doorway, still in his work clothes, concrete dust coating his boots. His weathered hands told the story of years building other people's dreams, but his eyes, those same sharp, intelligent eyes Jada had inherited, told a different story. "Because knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us, baby girl," he said, settling beside her on the floor. "I may work with my hands, but I think with my mind. These books, they're insurance." Jada traced the worn spine of a civil rights case study. Insurance against what? Darius stayed quiet for a long moment, watching his daughter's fingers move across the legal text like sheet music. "Against a world that tries to make you small." Jada was already accepted to 3 universities with partial scholarships. Her guidance counselor called her college material. Her teachers praised her natural intelligence, but none of them knew about the late-night hours she spent in those books, absorbing precedents and procedures the way other kids absorbed social media. Her bedroom walls told the real story. Where other teenagers hung posters of celebrities, Jada had taped up landmark Supreme Court decisions: Brown versus Board, Miranda versus Arizona, Gideon versus Wainwright. Each case was a victory for someone who had been counted out. "Jada, dinner!" her mother Tanya called from the kitchen. The Thompson family gathered around their small table every night without fail. It was their sanctuary, their planning room, their place of dreams. Tonight, like every night, Darius asked Jada about her day, really listened to her answers, and pushed her to think deeper. "Ms. Bennett says I should consider pre-law at Howard," Jada said between bites of her mother's famous mac and cheese. "Howard's expensive," Tanya said carefully. She worked double shifts at the hospital, and still they counted every dollar. "We'll find a way," Darius said firmly. "Jada's got something special. You can see it in how she thinks, how she questions everything." Jada looked at her father. This man who woke up early every day, came home bone-tired but still helped with homework, and believed in her dreams even when they seemed impossible. "I want to be a lawyer," she said quietly. "Not just any lawyer. I want to be the kind who fights for people like us." Darius smiled, the same smile that had carried him through years of being overlooked and underestimated. "Then that's exactly what you'll be." But their world was about to shatter. The call came while Jada was getting ready for school. Darius had been working on a major construction project downtown, a new office building that would house law firms and financial companies, the kind of building he would never be allowed to work inside, only build. The job site was dangerous, safety violations were common, but workers like Darius could not complain without risking their jobs. When he saw a crane operator showing up drunk and endangering the entire crew, he did what his conscience demanded. He confronted his supervisor, Jake Reynolds, a man who treated the mostly black and Hispanic crew like expendable equipment. "Garcia is drunk on the crane," Darius said. "Someone's going to get killed." Reynolds barely looked up from his clipboard. "Mind your business, Thompson. You're paid to build, not think." "I'm paid to go home alive," Darius shot back, "and so is everyone else here." That was when Reynolds snapped. He shoved Darius hard, screaming about uppity workers who didn't know their place. Darius stumbled backward, his hard hat falling off. The other workers watched in tense silence. They had seen this before. Reynolds' explosive temper, his particular hatred for anyone who questioned his authority. Darius steadied himself, his voice calm but firm. "Touch me again and we'll have a problem." Reynolds swung first. What happened next took only seconds, but it would change everything. Darius defended himself, pushing Reynolds away when the man came at him again. Reynolds fell, hitting his head on a stack of rebar. By the time the police arrived, Reynolds had crafted his story. The security cameras had mysteriously malfunctioned. The crew, terrified of losing their jobs, said nothing. Darius Thompson, honor student's father, devoted husband, a man who had never been arrested in his life, was handcuffed and charged with aggravated assault. And Jada Thompson's real education was about to begin. The Detroit Public Library became Jada's second home. She claimed the same corner table in the legal research section. The librarians knew her by name now, the teenager who spent long hours buried in case law while her classmates worried about prom dates. "Honey, we're closing soon," Mrs. Hayes said gently. Jada looked up from the criminal procedure manuals, her eyes red and strained. "Just a little longer? I'm so close to understanding this precedent." Mrs. Hayes's expression softened. She had watched Jada transform from a bright student into something desperate and determined. You can't save him if you collapse from exhaustion. But Jada could not stop. Every hour she was not researching felt like another nail in her father's coffin. The public defender assigned to Darius was Robert Ellis, a burned-out attorney juggling dozens of active cases. When Jada and her mother met him, he barely glanced up from his computer. Thompson, he muttered, clicking through files. "Ah, yes, the construction assault. Pretty straightforward. Prosecution's offering a shorter sentence if he pleads guilty. I'd take it." Jada's hands clenched. "But he's innocent. Reynolds attacked first." Ellis finally looked at her, his expression mixing pity and annoyance. "Sweetheart, that's not how the system works. It's your father's word against the supervisor's. Guess who the jury will believe?" "There were witnesses," Jada said. "Witnesses who want to keep their jobs." Ellis pulled out a form. "Look, I've been doing this for years. Black defendant, white victim, construction site altercation. The math is simple. The plea is a gift." Jada's mother spoke up quietly. "What if we fight it?" Ellis laughed bitterly. "Then he's looking at a long sentence. Aggravated assault, possible hate crime enhancement because Reynolds claims Darius used racial slurs. You really want to roll those dice?" Jada felt the walls closing in. This man paid to defend her father had already given up. "Can't we get a different lawyer?" "Private attorneys cost a fortune. You have that kind of money lying around?" The Thompson family went home that night in silence. Jada's scholarship letters sat unopened on her desk. Harvard, Yale, Columbia, dreams that felt increasingly meaningless. That was when Jada started digging deeper. Late one night, she discovered the Detroit Municipal Court Records database. It took hours to navigate, but once she did, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Judge Victor Harlan had been presiding over criminal cases. Jada pulled every case file she could access, creating spreadsheets that would make a statistician proud. The numbers told a horrifying story. In cases with black defendants and white victims, Judge Harlan's sentences averaged 394% higher than state guidelines. For white defendants with black victims, sentences averaged 23% below guidelines. Jada stared at her laptop screen late at night, hands shaking as she compiled the data. 43 black men had faced Judge Harlan on similar charges. Average sentence, 8 years. Average sentence for white defendants on identical charges, 18 months. "Oh my God," she whispered to her empty bedroom. But the worst part was not the pattern. It was how systematic it appeared. Harlan was not just biased, he was methodical. Jada found dismissed cases where white defendants had done far worse than anything Darius was accused of. Probation for assault charges that would have sent black men away for years. Jada printed everything, filling 3 binders with evidence of judicial bias that would make civil rights attorneys salivate. But who would listen to a high school girl? Jada's world continued crumbling in smaller, more personal ways. "Jada, you missed the college fair meeting again," her guidance counselor said after pulling her aside. "Harvard called asking about your enrollment deposit. Are you having second thoughts?" Jada stared at the acceptance letter, the letter that used to represent everything she had worked for. "I can't go to college while my father sits in prison for something he didn't do." "Jada, honey, I understand you're upset, but you can't throw away your future. Your father wouldn't want that. My father is facing a long sentence because nobody thinks he deserves a real defense." Ms. Bennett lowered her voice. Maybe he did do something wrong. Sometimes the people we love aren't who we think they are." The words hit Jada like a physical blow. Even here, where she had been celebrated as a model student, people assumed her father's guilt based on nothing more than his skin color. Jada's best friend, Rachel, cornered her at lunch. "Jada, you're destroying yourself over this. Everyone can see it. You look terrible. Your grades are slipping and you're throwing away a full ride to Harvard." "My father is innocent," Jada said quietly. Rachel rolled her eyes. Come on, Jada. He attacked his supervisor. There were witnesses. Just because you can't accept it doesn't mean the rest of us have to pretend it didn't happen. You don't know him. I know you're acting crazy. My dad says construction workers get violent all the time, especially when they're drinking or on drugs. Maybe your dad just snapped. Jada stood up slowly. Your dad has never worked a day of manual labor in his life, and mine has never touched drugs or alcohol. But Rachel was not listening. Jada, you're choosing him over your own future, over our friendship, over reality. It's not healthy. That afternoon, Jada sat alone in her car outside school, watching her former friends laugh about normal teenage problems. She felt ancient, like she had aged years. Her phone buzzed with notifications. College recruiters, scholarship committees, summer program directors, all opportunities that felt as distant as the moon. Jada drove to the courthouse, parking across the street from the imposing building where her father's fate would be decided. She watched lawyers in expensive suits stride up the steps, briefcases in hand, confidence in every step. Then she saw a different group. Families like hers clutching public defender business cards and worry lines etched in their faces. Two worlds that might as well have been different planets. A court clerk emerged for a cigarette break. Jada recognized him from her research visits and approached cautiously. Excuse me, sir. I'm researching Judge Harlan's court for a school project. Do you know anything about his judicial philosophy? The clerk, a black man in his 50s, looked around nervously. Little girl, let me give you some free advice. That judge has ended careers for less than what you're probably thinking. If someone you care about is facing him, he shook his head, start praying or start running. Jada's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The clerk took a long drag. Harlan doesn't just sentence folks. He destroys them, makes examples, sends messages, and he's got friends in high places who make sure nobody questions his methods. But that's illegal. There have to be oversight mechanisms, appeals processes. The clerk laughed bitterly. Child, you still believe the system works the way they taught you in civics class. Harlan's been doing this for years. You think nobody's noticed? You think nobody's tried to stop him? Jada felt her knees go weak. What happened to them? Transfer request denied. Bar complaints dismissed. Career advancement blocked. The clerk dropped his cigarette and ground it under his heel. That man has power you can't imagine. And your daddy? He looked at Jada with genuine pity. Your daddy's just another number to him. As the clerk walked away, Jada stood alone on the courthouse steps, the weight of impossibility crushing down on her shoulders. Her father was facing a rigged system, a biased judge, and a legal process designed to chew up people like him. She was a high school student with no money, no connections, and no real legal training. But as Jada stood there watching the sunset behind the courthouse dome, something crystallized inside her. They expected her to give up. They expected her to accept the inevitable. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The jail visitation room smelled like disinfectant and despair. Jada pressed her palm against the scratched plexiglass barrier, watching her father on the other side. In the time since his arrest, Darius had aged noticeably. His shoulders, once strong from years of construction work, now sagged with defeat. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his shrinking frame. But it was his eyes that broke Jada's heart. The same intelligent eyes that used to light up when discussing her future now stared at the table. Baby girl, Darius said through the phone, his voice barely above a whisper. Maybe I should just take the plea deal. I can survive it. Jada's throat tightened. Dad, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Wrong doesn't matter in here. Darius gestured around the visiting room filled with other families having desperate conversations. Look around, Jada. You see any of these people getting justice? You see any fair trials? Jada followed his gaze. In every corner, black and brown families clutched phones, tears streaming down their faces. Children asked when Daddy was coming home. Wives tried to hold everything together. This is my reality now, Darius continued, and I can't let you sacrifice your life trying to change it. Harvard is calling about your enrollment. Your mother told me you have to go. I'm not leaving you here. Darius leaned forward, pressing his hand against the glass opposite hers. Jada, listen to me. I've watched you your whole life, watched you read those law books like they were fairy tales. You were born for something bigger than this place. I was born to fight for my family. Then fight for us by becoming what you're meant to be. Don't let them destroy two Thompson lives. One is enough. Everyone wanted her to walk away, to accept that some battles could not be won. That night, Jada sat in her bedroom surrounded by college acceptance letters, her laptop open to housing applications. The smart play was obvious. Take the Harvard scholarship, build a successful career, maybe come back later and make a difference. But as she reached for the enrollment forms, her hand brushed against one of her father's old law books. The worn copy of constitutional law fell open to the Sixth Amendment. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial and to have the assistance of counsel for his defense. Jada stared at those words until they blurred. Assistance of counsel. Her father had counsel, a burned-out public defender who had already given up. But what if? Jada's fingers flew across her keyboard, searching legal databases with new purpose. She was not looking for assault precedents anymore. She was looking for something else entirely. Feta versus California. The Supreme Court ruled that defendants have a constitutional right to represent themselves in criminal proceedings. Jada's heart started racing, but self-representation was not enough. Her father needed help, and she had spent time learning his case better than any lawyer. She dug deeper. People versus Sharp, Michigan Court of Appeals. The court recognized limited circumstances where family members could assist pro se defendants, particularly when the defendant had been denied adequate counsel. Jada cross-referenced the ruling with Michigan's current statutes. There it was, buried in Section 841.2 of the Michigan Criminal Code. A pro se defendant may request familial assistance in cases where counsel has been deemed inadequate, subject to court approval. The legal loophole existed. It was narrow, rarely used, and would require proving that Ellis's representation was inadequate. But it was there. Jada printed the cases, her hands shaking with excitement. For the first time in a while, she felt hope crackling through her veins. Jada's transformation began that night. She cleared her desk of college applications, replacing them with legal pads, case files, and procedural manuals. Her bedroom became a war room. She started with the basics, memorizing every rule of criminal procedure, every evidence standard, every objection protocol. While her classmates studied for calculus tests, Jada studied cross-examination techniques. The public library became her law school. Jada arrived each morning as doors opened, claimed her corner table, and did not leave until closing. She took detailed notes on everything: jury selection strategies, opening statement structures, closing argument techniques. Mrs. Hayes, the librarian, watched Jada's evolution with growing concern. "Jada, dear, are you eating enough? You look thinner every day." Jada glanced up from a witness examination manual. "I'm fine, Mrs. Hayes, just focused." "What you're doing, child, it's remarkable, but it's also impossible. You know that, right?" Jada met her eyes. Impossible is just another word for something nobody's tried hard enough to achieve. Day by day, Jada's confidence grew. She practiced opening statements in her bedroom mirror, rehearsing until every word flowed naturally. She memorized case citations, evidence rules, and procedural statutes until they became second nature. But knowledge was not enough. Jada needed to understand her enemy. She spent hours researching Judge Harlan's background, his education, his career trajectory. She read every interview he had ever given, watched every speech at legal conferences. Harlan had built his reputation on being tough on crime, code for harsh on people who looked like her father. He had run for judge on a platform of restoring order and ending the revolving door of justice. The more Jada learned about Harlan, the more she understood what she was facing. This was not just a biased judge. This was a man who had built his entire career on people like her father. But Jada also discovered something else. Harlan's reputation was not as solid as it appeared. There had been whispers over the years, complaints about his conduct, questions about his sentencing patterns. Nothing had stuck because nobody had been brave enough to compile the evidence systematically. Jada had been compiling that evidence without realizing it. Shortly before the trial, Jada made her decision. She walked into the jail for what everyone assumed would be her goodbye visit. "Dad," she said, picking up the phone and looking directly into his eyes, "I found a way to represent you in court." Darius stared at her. "Baby girl, what are you talking about?" "There's a legal provision that allows family members to assist pro se defendants when their counsel is inadequate. I can be your voice in that courtroom." "Jada, no. You're a high school student. You don't know what you're up against." Jada's voice hardened with resolve. "I know exactly what I'm up against. A corrupt judge who's built his career destroying people like us. A system that assumes you're guilty because of your skin color." She leaned forward, pressing her hand against the glass. "But Dad, I also know something else. I know every case Harlan has tried in recent years. I know every legal precedent that applies to your situation. I know the law better than that public defender ever will." Darius studied his daughter's face, the determination in her eyes, the steel in her voice, the transformation from scared teenager to fierce advocate. "And I know," Jada continued, "that knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us. You taught me that, remember?" For the first time in a while, Darius Thompson smiled, not the defeated smile of a broken man, but the proud smile of a father watching his daughter become everything he had always known she could be. "Then let's go to war, baby girl." Shortly before the trial, Jada sat outside Reynolds' construction company, watching workers leave. She had been waiting for Victor Morales, the security guard listed as unavailable for comment in the police report. She spotted him walking toward the parking lot. "Excuse me, Victor." He turned, immediately wary. "Who's asking?" "Jada Thompson. Darius Thompson is my father." Victor went pale. "I can't talk to you. I told the police everything." "Did you? The report says you were unavailable for comment." Victor stopped walking. "Kid, I got mouths to feed. I can't lose this job." Jada showed him the news article. "They're sending my father to prison for something he didn't do. You saw what really happened." "I saw nothing." His voice cracked. "My father was protecting your crew from a drunk crane operator. Reynolds attacked first, didn't he?" Victor lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "Reynolds is connected. His family owns half the construction contracts in this city. People who cross him don't work here anymore. And people who let innocent men go to prison." Something in Jada's eyes, the same steel he had seen in her father, made Victor pause. "There's security footage," he said quietly. Jada's heart stopped. "What?" "The cameras weren't broken like Reynolds claimed. I saved everything." Victor looked around, then decided, "Follow me." They walked to the office building. Victor used his key card, leading Jada to the security office. "Reynolds told me to delete this," Victor said, sitting at the monitors. "Said the hard drives crashed, but I didn't. My sister was assaulted years ago. The guy got off with no evidence. I swore I'd never let that happen again." The screen flickered to life, showing construction site camera angles. Victor fast-forwarded to the incident. "There's your dad talking to Reynolds about Garcia on the crane." Jada watched her father approach Reynolds calmly, gesturing toward the unsteady crane operator. Reynolds' body language was aggressive from the start. "Watch this." On screen, Reynolds shoved Darius hard. Her father stumbled backward, hands up peacefully. Reynolds advanced again, swinging wildly. Only then did Darius defend himself, one controlled push that sent Reynolds into the rebar stack. "Reynolds came at your dad like a maniac," Victor said. "Textbook self-defense." Jada stared at the screen, tears streaming. Here was undeniable proof of her father's innocence. "Why didn't you come forward?" Victor ejected the USB drive, because Reynolds made clear what happens to people who cross him. He handed Jada the drive, but some things are more important than paychecks. Jada clutched the USB like gold. "This changes everything." "Maybe, but Jada." Victor's expression grew serious. "Reynolds' brother-in-law owns Harlan and Associates, Judge Harlan's family business. They've been steering city contracts to each other for years." The pieces clicked into place. "That's why Harlan is determined to convict my father. It's not bias, it's business. That judge protects Reynolds' interests. Workers who complain about safety violations end up in his courtroom facing trumped-up charges. Your dad's case is part of a pattern." Jada's mind raced. She had evidence to prove her father's innocence, but also proof of corruption at the very top. "Victor, will you testify?" He nodded slowly. "If you guarantee my family's safety, yeah. It's time someone stood up to these people." Jada walked out carrying more than evidence. She carried the key to exposing an entire corruption network. As she drove home, one thought pounded. They were not just saving her father. They were bringing down the whole system. The morning of the trial, Jada walked into the Detroit Municipal Courthouse carrying 3 thick binders. Media cameras flashed as she climbed the stone steps. The high school student representing her father had become news. Inside the packed courtroom, every seat was filled. Jada spotted her mother in the front row clutching a tissue. Behind her sat Darius's construction crew, taking time off work they could not afford. On the other side, Reynolds sat with his expensive legal team, smug expression intact. Judge Harlan entered, black robes flowing like a cape. The bailiff called for order as everyone stood. Jada felt hundreds of eyes on her as she took her place at the defense table next to her father. Darius squeezed her hand. "You sure about this, baby girl?" Jada straightened her shoulders. "I've never been more sure of anything." The prosecutor, District Attorney Michael Cain, was a political climber known for aggressive tactics and a perfect conviction rate. He had already given television interviews, calling the case a clear example of workplace violence that could not be tolerated. Judge Harlan banged his gavel. This court is now in session. I understand there's been an unusual request regarding representation. Jada stood, voice steady despite her racing heart. Your Honor, my name is Jada Thompson. I'm here to invoke my client's right to familial assistance under Michigan Criminal Code Section 841.2. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Harlan's face darkened. Young lady, this is highly irregular. Are you telling me you intend to represent the defendant? I'm telling you that my father, Darius Thompson, is exercising his constitutional right to self-representation with familial assistance as established in Feta versus California and recognized under Michigan statute. Prosecutor Kane jumped up. Your Honor, this is absurd. A high school student cannot possibly provide adequate legal representation. This is a serious felony case, not a high school mock trial. Jada pulled out her legal brief, hands steady now. Your Honor, if I may direct the court's attention to People v. Sharp Michigan Court of Appeals, which specifically allows familial assistance when appointed counsel has been deemed inadequate. Judge Harlan's jaw tightened. And what makes you think Mr. Ellis's representation is inadequate? The fact that Mr. Ellis advised my father to plead guilty to a crime he didn't commit without reviewing crucial evidence or interviewing key witnesses. He spent little time on this case before recommending a plea deal. The gallery gasped. Robert Ellis, the public defender, shifted uncomfortably. Judge Harlan leaned forward, voice dripping with condescension. Miss Thompson, let me explain something. This is not a game. This is not a movie where plucky teenagers save the day. This is a court of law where serious adults handle serious matters. Jada met his gaze without flinching. With respect, Your Honor, my father's freedom is the most serious matter in my life. I've spent time studying every aspect of this case more thoroughly than anyone else in this room. You've spent time? Judge Harlan laughed, the sound echoing through the courtroom. I've been practicing law for years. Mr. Kane has been prosecuting felonies for years. You think reading makes you qualified to... I think caring makes me more qualified than a public defender who couldn't be bothered to return our phone calls, Jada interrupted. The courtroom fell silent. Judge Harlan's face flushed red. Young lady, you will not interrupt this court. One more outburst and I'll hold you in contempt. Jada bowed her head slightly. My apologies, Your Honor. I was simply exercising my client's rights under established legal precedent. Prosecutor Kane saw his opening. Your Honor, even if we allow this circus to continue, the defendant's guilt is clear. We have witness testimony, physical evidence, and a pattern of aggressive behavior. This is an open and shut case. Jada stood again. Your Honor, the prosecution's case is built on lies, suppressed evidence, and witness intimidation. I can prove that every single allegation against my father is false. Judge Harlan's eyes narrowed dangerously. Ms. Thompson, those are serious accusations. Do you have any idea what you're suggesting? I'm suggesting that the truth matters, Your Honor, even in your courtroom. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Jada had just implied that Judge Harlan's courtroom was not a place where truth mattered, a direct attack on his integrity. Judge Harlan's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried through the entire room. Ms. Thompson, you are walking on very thin ice. I suggest you remember where you are and who you're addressing. Jada felt every person in the courtroom holding their breath. This was the moment of truth. She could back down, apologize, and hope for mercy. Or she could stand her ground and fight for her father's life. She thought about the black men Judge Harlan had sent away with sentences that destroyed families and communities. Jada lifted her chin and looked directly into Judge Harlan's eyes. Your Honor, I know exactly where I am. I'm in a courtroom where my innocent father is facing prison because the system failed him. I know exactly who I'm addressing, a judge who took an oath to ensure justice is served fairly and impartially. The silence was deafening. Judge Harlan's knuckles were white as he gripped his gavel. Your Honor, Jada continued, voice growing stronger, I respectfully request that you allow me to present evidence that will prove my father's innocence and expose the real criminal in this case. Judge Harlan stared at her for a long moment, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. Finally, he spoke. Ms. Thompson, against my better judgment and the standards of this court, I will allow you to proceed. But understand this, any disruption, any violation of procedure, any disrespect to this court, and your father will face the maximum penalty under the law. Jada nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. The defense is ready to proceed. As she sat down, Jada caught her father's eye. Darius was looking at her with a mixture of terror and pride. She had just declared war on one of the most powerful men in the city's legal system, and Judge Harlan had just accepted her challenge. Prosecutor Kane rose from his table, a predator's smile spreading across his face. He had prosecuted hundreds of cases, and this high school girl was about to learn why he had never lost. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Kane began, his voice booming with authority, "what you're about to witness is exactly why children don't belong in courtrooms. The defendant, Darius Thompson, has a documented history of workplace violence that his daughter conveniently forgot to mention." Jada's blood ran cold. What history? Her father had never been arrested before this incident. Kane pulled out a thick file. 3 separate complaints filed against the defendant: aggressive behavior toward supervisors, threats against management, a pattern of escalating violence that culminated in the brutal attack on Jake Reynolds. Jada shot to her feet. "Objection, those documents were never disclosed during discovery." Judge Harlan barely glanced at her. "Overruled. The prosecution has the right to present all relevant evidence. But Your Honor, Brady versus Maryland requires—" "Ms. Thompson, I will not have you lecturing this court on case law you learned recently. Sit down." Kane continued, emboldened. "The defense wants you to believe this was self-defense, but the evidence shows a man who had been building toward this explosion for some time, a man who finally snapped and attacked an innocent supervisor doing his job." Jada's hands shook as she flipped through her notes. None of this was in the original case file. These complaints had appeared out of nowhere, perfectly timed to destroy her father's credibility. "Furthermore," Kane said, pulling out photographs, "the defendant's injuries were minimal compared to the severe trauma inflicted on Mr. Reynolds. These photos show a man who was beaten within an inch of his life." The photos passed to the jury showed Reynolds with a bandaged head, his face swollen and bruised. Jada stared in shock. Her father had barely touched Reynolds according to the security footage. How could Reynolds look this injured? "Objection," Jada called out. "When were these photos taken?" Judge Harlan's gaze could have melted steel. "Ms. Thompson, you will ask questions during cross-examination, not during opening statements. One more interruption and you'll be held in contempt." Jada felt the case slipping away. Every piece of evidence she had carefully prepared was being countered by documents that did not exist before. The jury was already looking at her father with suspicion and fear. Kane moved closer to the jury box. "The defendant wants sympathy because he's represented by his daughter. Don't be fooled. Darius Thompson is a dangerous man who uses his fists to solve problems. The evidence will show he attacked Jake Reynolds without provocation, sending an innocent man to the hospital." Jada scribbled frantic notes. The photos had to be fake. The complaints had to be fabricated. But how could she prove it? And why was Judge Harlan allowing clearly inadmissible evidence? "In conclusion," Kane said, "this case is not about a father's love or a daughter's devotion. It's about holding violent criminals accountable for their actions. The state asks you to find Darius Thompson guilty of aggravated assault and send a message that workplace violence will not be tolerated in our community." Kane sat down to complete silence. The jury looked convinced. Several were already shaking their heads at Jada as if she were a naive child playing dress-up. Judge Harlan checked his watch. "We'll take a short recess before the defense presents its opening statement." As the courtroom emptied, Jada remained at the defense table, staring at the fabricated evidence that had just destroyed her case before it began. Her father leaned over. "Jada, baby girl, maybe we should take that plea deal. Kane is right. I don't want you going down with me." Jada looked at her father's defeated face, then at the prosecutor packing up his perfectly orchestrated lies. In the gallery, Reynolds was whispering to someone on his phone, a satisfied smirk on his face. They had been ready for her. Every move she had planned, every argument she had prepared, they had already countered. The fix was in deeper than she had imagined. Jada stood up, her laptop bag heavy on her shoulder. She walked toward the courthouse exit, past the reporters waiting for a statement, past the supporters who had believed in her father's innocence. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone and stared at the USB drive Victor had given her, the security footage that proved everything. But would Judge Harlan even allow it into evidence? And how could she authenticate it without Victor, who was probably already being threatened to stay quiet? Jada felt the weight of impossible odds crushing down on her shoulders. She was facing a prosecutor with unlimited resources, a biased judge, and a system designed to chew up people like her father. But as she stood there in the empty hallway, Jada remembered something her father had taught her. Knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us. They had ambushed her with lies. Now, it was time to hit back with the truth. Jada returned to the courtroom with fire in her eyes. The short recess had transformed her from a nervous teenager into something dangerous. She carried her laptop like a weapon. The defense may present its opening statement, Judge Harlan announced, barely concealing his irritation. Jada stood, walking to the center of the courtroom. Every person in the packed gallery leaned forward. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution just told you a story. A carefully crafted fiction designed to send an innocent man to prison. Her voice carried new authority. But I'm going to show you the truth. She clicked her laptop, the large courtroom screen illuminated with a crystal-clear video feed. This is security footage from Reynolds Construction on the day of the alleged assault, footage the prosecution somehow forgot to mention. Prosecutor Kane shot to his feet. Objection, this evidence wasn't disclosed. Your Honor, Jada interrupted smoothly. The prosecution just introduced undisclosed evidence without warning. I'm simply following their precedent. Judge Harlan's face darkened. Where did you obtain this footage? From the security company contracted by Reynolds Construction, the same company that was ordered to delete this evidence. Jada's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. But someone had the courage to preserve the truth. On screen, the footage showed Darius approaching Reynolds calmly. Reynolds' aggressive posture was obvious even without sound. Watch carefully, Jada said. You'll see Reynolds shove my father first. You'll see my father try to de-escalate. You'll see Reynolds attack again. The video played exactly as Victor had described. Reynolds shoved Darius hard. Darius stumbled but kept his hands up peacefully. Reynolds swung wildly. Only then did Darius defend himself with one controlled push. The courtroom was dead silent. Several jury members sat forward, studying the screen. Kane jumped up again. Your Honor, this footage could be doctored, manipulated. Could be, Jada said, but it wasn't. Your Honor, I call Victor Morales to authenticate this evidence. Judge Harlan's knuckles went white around his gavel. Mr. Morales was unavailable for testimony. He's available now. Jada nodded toward the back of the courtroom. Victor Morales walked down the aisle, his security uniform crisp, his face determined. The gallery murmured as he approached the witness stand. Judge Harlan leaned forward menacingly. Mr. Morales, are you certain you want to testify? Perjury charges carry serious penalties. Victor met his gaze without flinching. I'm certain, Your Honor. It's time to tell the truth. Jada approached the witness stand. Mr. Morales, were you working security on the day of the incident? Yes, I witnessed everything. Did Reynolds attack my father first? Absolutely. Reynolds was aggressive from the start. Your father was trying to protect the crew from a drunk crane operator. Reynolds didn't want to hear it. Kane objected frantically. Your Honor, this witness was thoroughly investigated. He was unavailable. I was threatened, Victor said loudly. Reynolds told me if I testified, I'd never work construction again. My family would be blacklisted. Jada turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, this is how the system works for people like my father. Evidence disappears. Witnesses are silenced. Truth becomes inconvenient. She clicked to a new slide showing financial documents. But the corruption goes deeper. Reynolds Construction is owned by the Reynolds family. Harlan and Associates, Judge Harlan's family business, has received millions in contracts from Reynolds Construction in recent years. The courtroom erupted. Judge Harlan banged his gavel violently. Miss Thompson, you are in contempt. Your Honor, Jada's voice rose above the chaos. These are public records filed with the city clerk's office. Your family business has been steering city contracts to Reynolds Construction while you've been sending workers who complain about safety violations to prison. Kane was on his feet screaming objections. Judge Harlan's face was purple with rage, but Jada was not finished. The fabricated complaints against my father. They were filed after Reynolds Construction lost a city contract due to safety violations. The fake injury photos, taken later at a private medical facility owned by Harlan and Associates. She turned to face Judge Harlan directly. Your Honor, this isn't just about my father. This is about a systematic corruption scheme that has destroyed dozens of families. Workers who speak up about unsafe conditions get arrested. Their families get destroyed. Also, your business can profit. Judge Harlan slammed his gavel. I will not tolerate these accusations in my courtroom. Jada's voice carried to every corner of the room. Then step down from this case. Recuse yourself. Let an impartial judge hear the evidence. The silence was deafening. Judge Harlan stared at Jada, his career hanging in the balance. Every person in the courtroom understood what was happening. A high school girl had just exposed a corruption network that reached the highest levels of the city's justice system. Furthermore, Jada continued, her confidence absolute, I now have documentation of many similar cases. Black men sentenced by this court to terms averaging far above state guidelines. Families destroyed to protect Reynolds Construction's interests. She faced the jury one final time. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. My father is innocent. The real criminals are sitting in this courtroom right now, but they're not at the defendant's table. Jada returned to her seat as the courtroom buzzed with shock and admiration. She had just destroyed the prosecution's case, exposed a massive corruption scheme, and proved her father's innocence beyond any doubt. Judge Harlan sat frozen, his world crumbling around him. Kane shuffled papers frantically, knowing his perfect record was about to be shattered. And Jada Thompson, the girl they had dismissed as a naive child, had just delivered the most devastating legal argument the Detroit Municipal Courthouse had ever witnessed. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Judge Harlan gripped his gavel, his face ashen as the weight of Jada's revelations settled over everyone present. The corruption scheme he had built had just been exposed by a high school girl. Prosecutor Kane frantically shuffled through his papers, searching for something, anything, to salvage his case. But there was nothing left. The fabricated evidence had been exposed, the witness intimidation revealed, and the financial connections laid bare for all to see. Judge Harlan's voice came out as barely a whisper. This court will recess for a few minutes while I consider the evidence presented. But Jada was not finished. She stood one final time, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had just changed history. Your Honor, before you recess, I have one more piece of evidence. Jada pulled out a thick folder. Affidavit from other construction workers who were threatened, arrested, or blacklisted after reporting safety violations to Reynolds Construction. All of their cases went through your courtroom. All received sentences far above state guidelines. She placed the folder on the clerk's desk. These men and their families deserve justice too. Judge Harlan stared at the folder as if it contained poison. His hands trembled as he reached for it, knowing that opening it would seal his fate permanently. Your Honor, Jada continued, the evidence is overwhelming. My father is innocent. The system failed him, but it doesn't have to fail others. Justice demands that you recuse yourself from this case immediately. The silence stretched. Then slowly Judge Harlan set down his gavel. His voice was barely audible. This court acknowledges that there may be conflicts of interest that prevent me from ruling impartially on this matter. I hereby recuse myself from this case. The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for the exits, calling their editors. The gallery buzzed with excited whispers. Jada's mother burst into tears of relief. But Judge Harlan was not done. He looked directly at Jada, his career in ruins, his reputation destroyed by a teenager with law books and determination. Miss Thompson, he said, his voice carrying grudging respect, in all my years of practice I have never seen such thorough preparation or fearless advocacy. You have reminded this court what justice is supposed to look like. Jada met his gaze without triumph, only the quiet dignity of someone who had fought for truth and won. Thank you, Your Honor. All I wanted was a fair trial for my father. Within hours, Judge Carolyn Hayes was assigned to the case. A respected jurist known for her integrity, she reviewed Jada's evidence in her chambers before court reconvened. When she entered the courtroom, her first words changed everything. After reviewing the evidence presented by the defense, this court finds the prosecution's case to be fundamentally flawed and potentially fraudulent. All charges against Darius Thompson are hereby dismissed. Jada felt her knees go weak. Darius reached for her hand, tears streaming down his face. Judge Hayes continued. Furthermore, this court is referring the evidence of corruption and witness intimidation to the State Attorney General's office for immediate investigation. Mr. Harlan, you are hereby barred from hearing any cases pending this investigation. The bailiff approached Darius with the key to his handcuffs. The metal clicked open, and for the first time in months, Darius Thompson was truly free. Father and daughter embraced as the courtroom erupted in applause. Construction workers who had taken time off they could not afford were cheering. Jada's mother rushed to join them, the three of them holding each other as tears of joy flowed freely. Prosecutor Kane quietly packed his files, his perfect record shattered by a teenage girl who refused to accept injustice. Reynolds sat in stunned silence, knowing that criminal charges were likely coming his way. But the most powerful moment came when Victor Morales approached Jada as the crowd began to disperse. Miss Thompson, he said, extending his hand, thank you for giving me the courage to do what was right. My daughter is going to grow up in a world where people fight back because of what you did today. Jada shook his hand, understanding that this victory was bigger than just her father's freedom. They had exposed a system of corruption that had destroyed countless families. They had shown that truth could triumph over power when someone was brave enough to fight for it. As they walked down the courthouse steps, Jada was surrounded by reporters shouting questions, but she only had one statement. My father is innocent, and today justice was served. But this isn't just about one case. This is about holding our system accountable and making sure every family gets the fair trial they deserve. Darius Thompson put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, looking at her with wonder and pride. The girl who had spent her childhood reading law books in their small apartment had just taken on the most powerful people in the city and won. Months later, Jada Thompson walked across the stage at her high school graduation, but her cap held more than just a tassel. Tucked inside was her acceptance letter to Harvard Law School with a full scholarship, not the one she had almost lost, but a new one created specifically for students who demonstrate extraordinary courage in pursuing justice. The Thompson family apartment looked different now. The same law books lined the walls, but they were joined by new additions, framed newspaper articles about the corruption case, a photo of Jada receiving the Detroit Bar Association's Young Advocate Award, and letters from families whose loved ones were being retried after Judge Harlan's conviction. Darius had returned to construction work, but now as a safety supervisor with the power to shut down dangerous operations. The same crews who had watched him get arrested now looked to him as a leader and protector. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Darius asked his daughter as they packed boxes for her move to Cambridge. Jada looked up from folding her clothes. "What, Dad? You didn't just save me. You saved every worker who will never have to face a rigged system because you had the courage to expose it." Jada smiled, picking up the worn copy of constitutional law that had started everything. "You taught me that knowledge is the one thing they can't take from us, and you taught me that courage is what turns knowledge into justice." The investigation Jada triggered had resulted in wrongful convictions being overturned. Judge Harlan was serving time for corruption. Reynolds Construction had been shut down, its contracts redistributed to companies that actually followed safety regulations. But Jada's biggest victory was not in the courthouse. It was in the dozens of letters she received from young people who saw her story and decided they would not accept injustice in their own lives. At Harvard Law School orientation, Jada stood before the brightest legal minds in the country. But she knew something they did not. The most powerful force in any courtroom is not prestige or connections or expensive suits. It is someone who refuses to be silent when they witness injustice. As Jada began her studies, she carried with her a simple truth. Every system, no matter how powerful or corrupt, can be changed by one person brave enough to stand up and fight. "What injustice will you refuse to accept?" Jada asked the camera during her final interview. "What corruption will you expose? What family will you fight for?" She looked directly into the lens, the same steel in her eyes that had faced down Judge Harlan. They underestimated a black girl with law books and a righteous cause. What are they underestimating about you? The system tried to break the Thompson family. Instead, Jada Thompson broke the system, and that is just the beginning. If Jada's story inspired you to never give up fighting for what's right, smash that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they refuse to stay silent. What injustice will you refuse to accept? Tell us in the comments below. Jada Thompson's incredible journey teaches us one of the most powerful lessons life has to offer. Never underestimate the quiet strength that lives inside an ordinary person who refuses to stay silent in the face of injustice. When the system seemed stacked against her father, when a powerful judge mocked her and tried to dismiss her as nothing more than a little ghetto girl, Jada didn't crumble. Instead, she turned pain into purpose, fear into fierce determination, and knowledge into a weapon that brought down corruption. At just 17, she showed the world that courage isn't loud or flashy. It's the steady decision to keep digging, keep learning, and keep fighting, even when every door seems locked and every voice tells you to give up. Her story reminds us that real change doesn't always come from those with money, connections, or fancy titles. It comes from someone who simply loves their family enough, believes in justice enough, and holds on to hope long enough to stand up alone if they have to. No matter who you are or what you're facing right now, whether it's unfair treatment at work, a broken system hurting someone you love, or doubts whispering that you're too small to make a difference, Jada's victory proves that one brave heart armed with truth can shake even the strongest walls. Knowledge truly is power, but courage is what turns that power into justice. Let her story light a fire in you today. The next time life tries to push you down, remember, they may underestimate you, but they have no idea what you're truly capable of when you refuse to back down. If Jada's story moved you, touched your heart, or inspired you to stand taller, drop a like and share it with someone who needs this message right now. Tell me in the comments, what injustice will you refuse to accept in your own life? What fight are you ready to take on? And if you want more powerful true stories of everyday heroes who change the world, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss one. Let's keep spreading hope and courage together, one story at a time.